Hey there, welcome to episode 103 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this at 5:08 in the morning, a.m. Pacific time, here in the greater Vegas area on Wednesday, October 29, 2025. Since we normally publish on Wednesdays, this works out nicely. Get an early start. Today's title and topic, firsts. Major accomplishments or proximity to, over time, things that have made it interesting, following the path. If you're not familiar with the Quaggling Sand audio program, if this is your first time listening, hey, thanks. The Quaggling Sand term is one that I coined when I was very young. Single digits, low single digits. It was to describe a condition that you might refer to as pins and needles, the sensation of circulation returning to a limb that has been otherwise numb, falling asleep on your hand, sitting on your foot, whatever the case may be. How Quaggling Sand seems to fit. This is basically a monologue, an audio essay program with stories, tales, recollections from days gone by. They may be interesting, informative. They may enlighten. They may entertain. They may educate. Who knows? This is Quaggling Sand. You can use the term, by the way. It's public domain. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a summary, which is one sentence. It's not very long. I'll read it to you. And the links for today's episode, I did not include any special links. I could have, but these are all old stories. And if you're really going to go looking for some of the backstory on these, then more power to you. So on that note, the show notes include this summary. Every once in a while, I look around at things like accomplishment and interestingness. And sometimes I look back for those things. And there are a few which you will learn about now. The links, as always, the reduced and simplified self-promotion links. This program has a homepage, quagglingsand.com. I'm in the midst of updating my page generation stuff, so bear with me on that. But hopefully by the time you listen to this, it'll be a little bit more current. My goal will be to have all episodes accessible without relying on the Spotify embedded player from the website. So primary point of publication, if you will. I've been talking about this forever. It's not been a high priority. I don't get a lot of web traffic anyway, but it's one of those things I should accomplish as part of a larger picture of similar things that hopefully will get a lot of traffic. Because why else do any of this, right? I'm mostly talking to myself. The profile page linking everything continues to be my about 5-year-old profile page on buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. I keep that up to date with links to my various audio programs, different projects. There's some biographical information, and there are some affiliate links. It will cost you nothing to visit this website. You need not pay any money, but if you do see something in the affiliate link section at the bottom, these are things that I actually use. So I figured, hey, if you want to support the effort in some way that doesn't actually cost you any money, and you like coffee, for example, why not? So check that out if you like. And again, links to all the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program, the Buy Me an Update, the Coffee Solo, the FFS Talk, and the Cafe Genius Impresarios. And one of these days, we'll get Hugo Floss up and running. So there you go. So let us begin. First, with an apology of sorts. A lot of my more interesting accomplishments are from my time in Silicon Valley. Technically, my 2 times in Silicon Valley. I have gone over the time interval a few times, the 2 tours of duty, as I've referred to them. The .com era and the ensuing .com, .bomb era, I should say. So the second time I was there was very different from 2005, sorry. I left in 2001, perfect timing. And I moved to Arizona, moved back to Silicon Valley in 2005 till 2013, house fire, on to Vegas. There are some other things perhaps, but none would be as recognizable, I think. I could mention something that would be interesting to a smaller group like me, myself, and I perhaps. Not everything is pure technology. A lot of it is, and somewhere in the middle is the stuff that maybe called tech adjacent, but probably most of the things will be considered tech, except for the first ones. Most of these are not about me. not so much solo efforts as proximity and hands-on with many others, often standing on the shoulders of giants, as Sir Isaac Newton might say. As well, not everything is an absolute first. Sorry, I had to check a little audio capture there. Not everything is an absolute first, but sometimes we were just in the pack, headed in the same direction. Like when 2 or 3 movies with similar stories are released at the same time from different studios or producers, whatever. So we're all getting there in different ways. So it's hard to say that it was absolutely first, but it was like leading edge into the the fast-paced world of disruption and chaos that was Silicon Valley. So yeah, let's get started. The Vegas stuff is not quite as interesting. The part where I worked for Intel, sure. Hopefully I'll have some innovation for you coming up soon though for Vegas. So yeah, sorry for the Silicon Valley slant. There's always a food truck thing though. If you have listened to almost any of my other episodes, that's an exaggeration. It's not that often. You know there have been food trucks appearing in stories a few times. This is no exception, and in fact, they appear twice today. While it is true that I worked on 7 different food trucks in Silicon Valley, basically the front of the house where I took orders and interacted with the customers, these were far from firsts. That part has been done. In the Bay Area, though, after getting to know so many owners and how the marketplace appeared to function or dysfunction, I started looking around the country at how it was done elsewhere. It became clear that these people should form, that M in there, should form an owners association, sometimes called a business league, an amplifier of their concerns. The Chamber of Commerce is a business league also. Well, a Chamber of Commerce is a Chamber of Commerce, but a Chamber of Commerce, a business league, professional organization in general, 501c6, tax exempt, but not nonprofit, but not tax exempt. Yeah, there you go. So it's not a charity, but it is a structure. You can actually lobby for change, which we did. I went to a lot of city council meetings. That part was very educational. The whole thing was really. We wanted to change the rules for operation of mobile vending on the streets and in parking lots of the various small businesses and office parks that were all over Silicon Valley. I testified in a civic grand jury investigation about commissary cleanliness and health code violations and more. This was the first owners association that these mobile vendors had formed. It was not the first in the country, but the second in California and the first in the Bay Area for as thriving a marketplace as the Bay Area was. Food trucks were becoming popular back then, and they pretty much still are. On moving to Vegas, I started talking to food truck owners after my time with Intel. I had more time here. I was not traveling so much, although when I did travel, I did encounter food trucks in other places, which is always interesting. I found that they had similar issues with health department and brick and mortar business fights. Really, restaurants don't like food trucks. That's just a fact. Gouging by way of outrageous fees and revenue share percentages, and a general lack of useful interface between mobile vendors and, say, event organizers and others as well. Finding food trucks still always a challenge. Here again, first owners association for mobile vendors in Southern Nevada. Another learning experience, and in this case, a profound level of disappointment with the cutthroat nature of the marketplace. They were really only interested in individual success. So even though it would benefit them to work together, they didn't quite understand co-opetition as the mobile vendors in the Bay Area. So lesson learned. I moved to Silicon Valley on graduating from Harvey Mudd College in 1993, and I eventually, I moved there in July, and I started working for Apple in November of 1993. End of October, early November, somewhere in there. It was just as the Bush recession, Bush 41, George H.W. Bush. His recession was winding down and the job market was still a little bit odd. I was basically contract, so I couldn't get a full-time job in Silicon Valley for a while because everything was just so tenuous. Clinton was just coming into office. Al Gore was inventing the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So almost 4 years. Pretty much definitely the first 2 years for sure. With Apple Computer, the company I'd always wanted to work at back then anyway. Today, no way. I worked at Apple. I worked in or for Apple Quality. Technically, I worked for Audia, Audia, I can't remember what the full name of the company was. They had a number that you would call. If you ever are not sure if you work for Apple, call this number and they'll tell you you don't. It was actually a valuable addition to my work experience this many years later to be a quality assurance tester in Apple quality. You learn a lot about how products are supposed to work and how they actually work and how to try to bring those two together. And as an engineer or as anyone who tries to build things for other people, that's a good experience. So I wouldn't figure that out for quite some time. I happen to have been working on the then brand new, they were still developing, the Power Mac series, the product line that would replace the 68K Macintosh. The original Macintosh was the microprocessor inside was a 68,000. They made it all the way up to the 68040 from Motorola. And it turns out that Motorola, IBM, and Apple collaborated on a RISC microprocessor called the Power PC. Fun fact, it was based on the Power architecture from IBM. It was based on the 88,000 bus interface from Motorola. And then Apple was coordinating, developing a system around this. So Power PC. I did hold in my hand one day, it was a prototype card called the Blue Plate Special. I think it was 4 88,000s that were emulating, I think it was 4 88,000s that were emulating the bus interface for what would be the power processor or the power instruction set. So they were using it for testing of some sort. So yeah, Apple had a 68020 emulator and was attempting to launch a completely different computer that would run all of the old software on this new machine. Unlike Windows, which was using emulation to accomplish this, but on the same processor. So they were emulating hardware or services, but Windows pretty much had to run on an Intel microprocessor, hence the Wintel label. This was fairly radical for a consumer computer system at the time, to think that you could take all of your software that was running on your old Mac and completely change the underlying hardware and platform and so on, and things would just work. Not as fast, but they would work. Since the Apple change from PowerPC to, they changed from Motorola to PowerPC. That was the big one that got all the press. Then they changed from PowerPC to the Intel products, the Intel microprocessors, x86 line, which was again a really substantial change. And then they built their own version of an ARM microprocessor, which they are using today. This has become old hat, starting with the stuff we were doing. So we kind of established the Apple sort of workflow for transitioning entire hardware platforms without breaking everything. Some time later, I was a contractor in the Newton Group. If you remember the Newton Group, also a groundbreaking product that never really quite worked in its early form. But I was working on some developer tools for the radically redesigned MessagePad 2000, which was going to be a big game changer, powered by the Strong Arm, developed by Digital Equipment Corporation. It was an ARM processor, but super fast for the time. It was a landscape orientation Newton with 2 PCMCIA slots, cards, expansion card slots, and more. This was not the Newton MessagePad 100 that everybody became familiar with, including Doonesbury making fun of it and its bad handwriting recognition. This had come a long way. So this was not absolutely first, but it was a substantial transition into what I might call an adult platform for real work. The Palm Pilot kind of beat Apple to the punch with the Palm 1000 and 5000. And then they would go on to greatness, establishing the graffiti weird writing system. So Apple was trying to bite off more than it could chew at the time. I think if Newton were implemented today, it would probably do a lot of damage. Like phones have become a very different thing, but back then it was like pure utility and functionality and kind of cool gee whiz factors. To this day, the notepad thing that was on the Newton, you could write, and it looked like a sheet of lined paper on the screen, and you could scroll it up and whatnot. But if you wanted to take a note and end it and then move on to another note, you would just swipe a line across the screen, and it was basically virtually splitting the text that you were writing or whatever, the drawings, whatever you're doing. Stuff like that was cool, kind of a gee whiz factor. So yeah, the Newton had a lot of cool stuff, and that was pretty groundbreaking at the time. So that was exciting, actually. It was a fun time working in that group. I think I was a contractor there for 6 months, which was pretty normal. And then on to some other stuff. I worked for a couple of little things. These aren't really enough to form a whole section. I worked for a company called TrueVision on the Target 2000 video capture device. It was built initially for old EISA PCs. That was the, I can't remember what it stands for now, but EISA bus. Very old. But we were kicking off the new bus-based Target 2000 for Macintosh, which is where all the video production tools were running anyway. Adobe Premiere was a big one. The Target was the center of a prosumer video production marketplace with real television and video advertising campaigns and other content captured, edited, and output with this system, which was, I have to say, pretty cool. It was a bit of a game changer for prosumer. This eventually found its way into the Avid video editing bays of the time. Avid was a huge name, and so they were building around our Target 2000. Then all this was eventually acquired by Pinnacle. But that was after my time. But yeah, that was some game-changing stuff going on. Also, my first trip out of the country for work. I went to Japan to do some work with Sony. Built another product around the Target 2000 platform. So yeah, pretty cool. And I believe that was my first full-time job. I think TrueVision actually hired me from being a consultant to actually a part of the team. So gee whiz. I worked for a German company called SCM Microsystems right around the time the chip cards that we have in our pockets today were becoming a possibility. In the United States anyway. They were already in common use in Europe. Chip cards, chip cotton. What else? I think we call them smart cards. I think there was pretty much chip cards. SCM made a PC MCI reader, smart card reader interface, which could plug into a desktop computer, a laptop, and some of the point of sale terminals that were kind of early to this. And the new message pad 2000 even. The game was changing at the interface at their interface and their interface device. The PCMCIA card was a part of it. And I learned all about ISO 7816, which is the set of standards for smart cards of the day. And they're pretty much the same since. So that was a game changer. It was bringing smart cards to America. And there weren't too many people looking at that at the time. There was a company called Gem Plus or Gem Plus because it was French, and Schlumberger. And one of the lead engineers that was developing all this stuff at Gem Plus had moved to SCM Microsystems. They had a team in La Ciotat, France, which was right on the Mediterranean coast. And so I went to France and hung out with them for a week to learn about how the systems worked. And the town was shut down because it was not yet Easter. And so because Europeans take vacation after the weather changes around Easter time. So I was there when it was cold and the town was empty. And the hotel I was staying in was empty. It was a little odd. I did not work on this directly, but to round out the smaller stuff my first tour of duty, if you will. My first job in Silicon Valley was actually at SuperMac, which put me 5 feet away from the Fuji Xerox project in the lab. I was working on video card accelerations, the Thunder 2, the Thunder 24. There was probably 2 others. That's where I learned about product feature crippling, by the way. Make one good product and then reduce its functionality to segment your market. So you can charge lower prices, but not have to develop a new product. Great. So the Fuji Xerox project, which connected a Macintosh to a really high quality color copier, the kind that would leave a texture on the paper. That's important. So SuperMac was developing the RIP, the raster image processor that would convert PostScript and other documents from Quark or PageMaker or Photoshop. So do the color correction, color space conversions, and so on, and render, rotate, do other effects, and so on to get it onto the page of a color copier. Amazing. If you've ever noticed those orange denomination numbers on the back of your US currency, like little orange 20s or hundreds, these help to avoid duplication because all photocopiers and similar products, I think it's at the photocopying level. I don't think it's at the printer level. They're required to recognize those constellations, as they're called, and then not copy the money. Thus, counterfeiting of currency using, say, a high quality color copier from Fuji Xerox attached to a computer like a Macintosh for editing serial numbers, for example, and whatnot, would not be so easily possible as it was at the time. the early days before Bitcoin, people could make their own money using the Fuji Xerox color copier. That's actually a true story. At some point, somebody came along and said, "Oh, people are making counterfeit hundreds in Japan with these printers." And I mean, you could photocopy a $100 bill. That was fine. But you could actually, you could scan in one $100 bill. You could lay them out and print multiple $100 bills with different serial numbers and so on. If you had proper cloth paper, you were in business. And some people were. So that was kind of an interesting time. I was not on that project specifically, though. I eventually would work at Netscape, inventors of the browser, I suppose. Arguably. The World Wide Web was coming on strong at the time, and Netscape was interested in integration of smart cards into a secure platform model. This meant like being able to plug in a smart card to have your password stored on it. I know that sounds crazy, right? Jumping from SCM to Netscape was pretty easy because they were looking for the skill set. Oh, you work with smart cards? You already know how they work? Okay, come on down. But then they basically dropped their interest in smart cards completely as it was far too early. Nobody had smart cards. It wasn't a part of our culture yet. So people did understand, though, one-time passwords. I was in the security group. My first project turned out to be an initial integration of what is called basic auth. That was in the old days when your browser would put up a dialog box that you type in a name and a password. It was outside of the website, so it was part of the browser itself. Not as flexible, so nobody liked it, so they kind of faded. But we turned basic auth into a thing, into a service in the browser that would interoperate with, well, we didn't have to change the browser. It would interoperate with Security Dynamics product called Secure ID, which was like a little credit card. It looked like a calculator without numbers on it, like a pocket, like a wallet credit card calculator, although some of them did have a keypad. So you would look at your number and you'd type in your username into the basic auth window. And then when it said password, you would type the password you knew, your memorized password, and then you would add on the 6-digit code that would change. It's called a one-time password. It would change every 20 or 30 seconds. And we use these today using your Google Authenticator or similar. So it's just running a TOTP algorithm. Every few seconds, it recalculates the hash of a random number seed, and there you go, for a given time. So when you get your here, save this in your here's your what do they call it? Your two-factor authentication code, and you scan a QR code. Maybe it's storing that seed value so it can generate time-based codes into the future forever. So as long as both sides match because they have the same code, you're in business. But those were not around at the time. So you'd use your security ID, Secure ID from Security Dynamics. So I was working on the integration of the Netscape web server with the ACE server from Secure Dynamics. So this was basically brand new stuff. So that was pretty cool, actually. The main thing I worked on was during the transition from Navigator 3 to Communicator 4, which included what we called at the time mail and news. So they integrated that into one big sort of productivity suite of sorts. That was a product that they would actually sell to companies with seat licenses, but it was still available for free for normal people. And our group was working on what's called SMIME, or Secure Multi-Part Internet Mail Extensions. So S and a slash and then MIME. This, again, was a feature not common in a consumer-level product at the time, especially in the free communicator browser. So to put it in there, it was pretty cool that basically enabled secure email for anyone. Although SMIME never really caught on for consumers because the certificate management is not really easy and the certificates are not so easily available. You actually have to pay for them. And then everybody involved has to be using them. I think the X509 certs. So if you're not using them, then there's no point in using SMIME at all because you'll send people mail that they can't read. But PGP, on the other hand, was really catching on right around the same time. This was back in the days when encryption was considered a munition and it couldn't be exported and it couldn't be, there was a whole bunch of restraints on it because it was considered a weapon. And now it's considered, it'll probably become a weapon again. But PGP is basically an open standard. It's still around today, and you can generate your own keys, and they have the circle of trust to authenticate or verify other people's keys by signing them. So there's a whole infrastructure that's grown up around that. So a little bit more usable. But at the time, we were kind of breaking new ground. I think Outlook had S/MIME support for commercial clients, but the casual person was not really able to use S/MIME. And to have that be just built in for free, pretty interesting. I initially shared a super cubicle, like a three cubicles stuck together with Brendan Eich, the creator of JavaScript, and eventually I would be in the cube right next door. We all got to watch the evolution of JavaScript, which included the very early days of dynamic HTML or DHTML, which was long before Web 2.0 became the big thing. So to watch that unfold, everything that we're doing today was based on this profoundly rushed person, Brendan, trying to get JavaScript in workable state and fixing huge, massive security holes and all sorts of chaos. But production by street. So yeah, that's where we are today. That's JavaScript. It was all starting back then. Eventually, I would go to UMax Computer Corporation, makers of Mac clones. For a while, this was a company that probably provided me with the most interesting stuff to learn about, starting with open firmware, which was going to power the latest PowerPC processor-based systems that were going to run Mac OS, Windows NT PowerPC, Solaris PowerPC, and lo and behold, Linux PowerPC. The PowerPC processor from Motorola, the Arthur. This was the first thing I worked on. The Arthur was a new PowerPC from Motorola, the G3. It was intended for laptops, like mobile applications. It still consumed a lot of power, but I had to make the Arthur work in the UMax upgradable computers with what they called the interposer. It was like a little circuit board that acted like a socketable CPU, and then it would plug into a ZIF socket on the motherboard. That's zero insertion force for those keeping track. They were Macintosh clone systems, so they looked and acted like Macs, but you could upgrade the processors, which was not so common with Apple. They did enable it in some cases with this giant slot thing. So this was a lot more cost effective, and we could make these upgrades more quickly than Apple would release for their platform. So it gave UMax a little bit of an edge. But we were only Macintosh licensees. We had no access to their source code. So it took me 4 days to reverse engineer the backdoor Gary Davidian hack to enter processor ring 0 on the PowerPC during init time so I could size and configure the backside cache memory that made the parts so fast. And when they were fast, by doing something so simple way back then. Now every processor has the equivalent of this cache memory on board. There's L1 caches were common. It's kind of an L2, L3 thing, depending on how many cores. So it's probably L3 backside cache running at crazy speed and big memory, not just like 10K or whatever. We're talking megabytes. So pretty cool, pretty interesting to go through the reverse engineering process. There you go. Reverse engineering process with this new processor. So it's kind of like all of the nerd toolbox tools were splayed out. And turns out Gary Davidian was the person who wrote the first 68K emulator for the Power Mac that I was working on when I was at Apple. I actually interviewed with him for a job at Apple working in his group. And while he wanted to hire me, they basically fell back on you don't really have enough experience. Guess how you get that? I know, it's an old story. Everybody's probably encountered that at least once. So UMax was actually working on a Chirp Prep PPCP machine. So as I mentioned, it was going to run those different operating systems. Chirp, CHRP, Common Hardware Reference Platform. Prep, PowerPC Reference Platform, so PREP. And eventually they settled on the name PPCP, which was PowerPC Platform. So we basically, my daily main focus, which was for the entire time I was with the company until they transitioned to Intel parts, we had about a dozen prototype boards that were about the size of a large pizza box. They were kind of huge. These, we called them the Basecamp boards, were how we were to make this product work. It's called Bring Up or Power On. So you go weeks and months with it not working, and then one day it just lights up. The lights come on, the drive starts spinning, you hear a little beep, and suddenly it works. So it actually did not work. We got very, very close until Steve Jobs rejoined Apple and decided to kill off the Apple clone program, including the possibilities of running their software on these machines that they had been supporting before jobs came back. Now, when I say it didn't work, we did boot it and it did have minimal fun. So to say it didn't work is kind of not completely accurate, but it never really left the lab. Bad timing. Yeah, Jobs was kind of a party pooper, to say the least. As Apple left us clone companies out in the cold, we went down the street, literally from the UMax offices, which were across the street from Great America. Yes, we used to ride the rides every day at lunch with our season pass. So we went down the street to the R&B building, where Intel, basically that's their main location in Santa Clara. It's the building where I worked when I would many years later, work at Intel. So we went down the street literally and got Intel to make UMax their launch partner for their new products after a lawsuit situation with our predecessor in that role, Intergraph. Intergraph was based in Mountain View, if I'm recalling correctly. So thus, as we were transitioning out of making Power Macs, we became Intel's first best development partner for launching new products. So that we were able to get the very first access to the original Slot 1 Pentiums, Pentium 2 parts. They were kind of the next generation Pentium Pro parts, and they were on a slot instead of being a chip that you would put into a socket. Slot technology didn't last too long, but we were the first. We had a field support engineer. Field application engineer, not support. So we had an FAE. His name was Eric. And we had a marketing person whose name I do not remember. And they gave us money for marketing. And they gave us the technical the technical specifications for all the parts. They gave us consulting services. So they would review our designs. It's pretty neat. And so that was a big first. That was like literally the cutting edge of new desktop computer technologies. We developed 2 motherboards. They worked perfectly. The Intel team reviewed them. They said they were actually pretty impressive. The signaling was good. The quality overall, the design, the layout, everything was spot on. I don't know about today. Intel would probably not know what they were doing. Sorry, that's the way it is. These products never saw the light of day, unfortunately, because UMax started to just bail. They decided, why do we need to pay Silicon Valley engineers? We're in Taiwan. We can work directly with companies in Taiwan. Are we seeing a pattern yet? Get really close to launching a product and then company gets shut. We all moved to Philips. After UMax shut down, we all moved over to Philips Components to work in the Flat Display Systems group, which was part of Philips Components. Right around the time Philips released the very first consumer LCD TV, which you may remember at the time was $15,000, and it was thick. We were going to be creating an OEM, that's original equipment manufacturer infrastructure, to connect the Philips flat panel manufacturing business to products. So we would enable original equipment manufacturers to take our products and integrate them into their products and so on. Actually, is that the OEM label applies to either Philips or the third party in that case? I don't know. Second party, I should say. All right, let's stop it getting confusing. This was an interesting time when they were doing all this stuff with awful 6-bit panels. So they had reduced color space that would have multiple dead or stuck pixels connected to your computer with an analog cable that was used for your big giant CRT monitor before then. Usually called a VGA cable, but that's probably just a common reference, but it's not the technical name. These were interesting times to be sure, especially if we look at how far flat panel displays have come. And they're in everything, your phone, your tablet, your computer, your TV, your microwave, everything. Everything's got a flat display. Your refrigerator probably, not your microwave. So yeah, we were like, Philips was leading edge on making panels affordable for everyday use in all kinds of things. And that's what we were trying to enable. The climate at Philips, though, the largest company I've ever worked for, was 160,000 people worldwide at the time. It was very odd. Dutch company. So 3 of us in the Flat Display Systems group departed to work on a startup that was started by one of those 3 people. It wasn't me. With a 4th person from Apple joining in. It was called Motive Power. There's a company out there now called Motive Power, no relation. The main product was a PCI card, so a peripheral component interconnect, a card that you can plug into your computer with a battery-backed EDO, that's extended data out memory, DIMMs, dual inline memory modules, memory controller that would enable anyone to use their old EDO DIMMs to make a persistent RAM disk. So you could put stuff in it and turn off your computer, and it was battery backed, but also had a external power, so you could plug it into the wall directly. The cool part was to integrate a caching system as an operating system service so that file activity would be cached to accelerate everything. Nowadays, you'll see this with, I think Windows introduced like a hybrid drives that had some sort of SSD or flash memory on a hard drive. So it would cache a bunch of stuff in the flash maybe, but flash, I think for writing, because writing would take long. I can't remember. But basically this became part of the Windows platform at some point to have like a hybrid storage system with tiered performance levels to try to make everything fast. So that's basically what we were doing. So the cool part was integrating this cache system though. So that basically anything you were doing, saving files, loading files, editing files, instead of writing out to disk, it would store it in this memory hard drive, a RAM disk. And then because it was battery backed, if the power went out at some point, you didn't lose everything. And that's one of the downsides to having these big caches is you're not saving it to disk. You're getting good performance, but then one wrong move, everything goes away. So we basically had this thing that would avoid that. And you could see visibly that your computer was performing better, faster, saving files, loading files faster. So pretty cool, pretty good demo. Unfortunately, and this was not up to me, the motive power people, which were basically former UMax people that were the investors. I don't mean UMax in Taiwan. I mean UMax in Silicon Valley. They decided to work with Adaptec because they knew somebody there that was in a position to possibly partner. Adaptec was famous for making SCSI 3, that small computer systems interface. SCSI was popularly used for hard drives and scanners. So they had a SCSI 3 adapter. You could put it down on the motherboard. You could get an Adaptec expansion card on a PCI card. Their business was hard drives or hard drive controllers. So to me, it made no sense that we were going to go in there and say, yeah, now you don't have to spend money on a fast hard drive because you can just stick in the motive power thing and it will make your normal hard drive faster. And I said, they probably want to buy it to not ever launch it, ever. So then we kind of rejiggered a little bit to make the cache take advantage of fast SCSI. So we said, hey, instead of only caching what you're working on, we should be able to develop a statistical model of what people are doing through their day. And we called it proactively caching. So we'd preload things based on usage and whatnot. So, if you typically do this in the afternoon, we'll go ahead and move that into the cache. So we're trying to take maximal advantage of fast hardware. And that worked pretty well, given that we had pivoted like that. Eventually, though, the person that was at Adaptec who was interested in this disappeared. The whole deal fell apart. Everything about the company fell apart. And so once the launch partner Adaptec bailed, that was pretty much that. So that was some pretty fun, interesting possibility there. And since then, this feature that we were working on, it's actually pretty commonly available. You can probably get a Macintosh application. There are some Linux tools that do it for free, open source. So that was interesting, though. That would have been an interesting product to have in the personal portfolio. Before I departed Silicon Valley, I worked on a consulting basis for an educational toy company that had, until then, focused entirely on pre-K and then K through about 4. So kindergarten through 4th grade or so. Like math and phonics and the talking globe. And I can't remember what the book was called. You could touch things in a spiral bound book and it would read to you or it would describe things. Anyway, it was pretty neat. They were great educational products for those age ranges. So preschool and then K through 4, you're touching the book, you're touching the globe, etc. They wanted to build a product aimed at high school students for test preparation. They were trying to expand their market, the total addressable market. That was a profound learning experience for me, wherein people with the best of intentions simply had no idea what they were doing, getting this entirely different kind of product into a different kind of space so that it worked as one might hope it would. Since I was the external consultant, of course, and I've talked to many people over the years, and this is not uncommon at all. But at the time, I was like, ugh. they appear to have blamed me for everything. Oh, who's that consultant guy? Yeah, it's maybe because of him. So it just shipped very late, which drove up their costs or drove down their profits, depending on how you want to look at it. And they would go public eventually, and then VTech would buy them. So what does it matter anyway? It was fun though, and it was funny because it was not true at all that I was responsible for any of this silliness. They had no idea what they were doing, to be honest. They were changing product specs after like cutoffs. What if we do this instead? You're like, we committed to the thing 2 weeks ago. So there's a lot of that going on all the way up to the very last day. And then I moved to Arizona. I'm like, get me out of here. Let me leave the entire state. That's how much fun that was. I worked for Palm, and this is going to be the last one. I didn't want to go too much detail. We could go on for a while if we go into the minutia. And I didn't really feel like Intel was so groundbreaking. It was a new kind of business to work with makers, but Intel kind of screwed that up too. The reality show, I've talked about that. So we're going to end with Palm. This is probably the more interesting thing because it's more recent, but also it's had a lingering impact to this day because my time at Palm working on the Pre would be followed by some of the same features showing up in Android and iPhone devices, and some of them are still lingering today. So yeah, this is sort of you might actually recognize the card interface, for example. Technically, I was hired into the QA group because the person that hired me had actually worked at Jawbone, where I had worked previously, and I had met that person when I was working in the Newton group at Apple. Another pattern forms. But the Building 3 team, the one without the company logo on it, that was across the street and around the corner from the main headquarters. What's going on in that building? The Building 3 team was basically sprinting toward a launch date, so everybody was kind of doing a little bit of everything. There was no, oh, this is not your job. It's more like, what are you sitting there doing nothing? No, I'm already behind. I'm trying to know you're going to be doing more now. This was not the first cell phone by any means. The Palm Pre was, a couple generations in. The iPhone was around. The Android, no, I think it was 2 generations in. And the Android, was it 2? No, I'm trying to remember. The Android 1, the first Android phone from Google, was shipping. It had a flip out screen and a little keyboard. It had a trackball. It weighed a ton. Not very fast. The screen was not very great, but it was their entry into the marketplace. The iPhone was out, and either the second one had come out, but the next one was about to ship right around the same time as our Pre was supposed to. So that was a fun time. And I think I've talked about the flash issues that we found. And yeah, so there was a lot of interesting things about the Pre. It was not the first cell phone, like I said, but it was going to be one of the more open cell phones for the time, which meant it was running Linux, and Android is very similar to Linux. So there's Linux kernel, but it's heavily modified. But our machine was running a kernel that was probably pretty similar to what Android was doing. This was early in the game, so Android had not completely gone off the rails with their Linux kernel. So we would talk to the Android people at Google every once in a while and make sure everything was working across different processor lines. They were all ARM. The OMAP from TI, I think it was, and Qualcomm had a part, and so on and so on. But we had, you could plug in your USB cable, and you could do the old Konami code, which is up, down, left, right, AB something. I can't remember now. Not a gamer. But you type in that code, and it would launch a little terminal program or terminal server in the phone. And you could get a bash shell script, and you could write little programs in shell script, or you could install other packages, use iPackages, just like the old compact iPack. So you could install Python or whatever, right? You could put all kinds of stuff on there and it was like having a little computer in your pocket. And it had a keyboard, which was actually pretty usable for being so small. And it had a pretty good screen, it had a pretty good camera. For being a first generation product with all this new and crazy thinking, it was pretty ridiculous. And to this day, it's one of those like, man, I wish they would have shipped that. I mean, they did ship it, but I wish they would have done it correctly. Today, you are using your iPhone or Android device, and you see a few things that fell out of the Palm team's work, including the swipe card interface. So if you want to close an application, you swipe a card. I don't know if iPhones still do that, but that all originated in the Palm Pre. Part of that is because the lead user and experience designer, Matias Duarte, moved from Palm over to Google as things were collapsing and WebOS was being sold off to HP or Lenovo or something. There are some smart TVs that are now powered by WebOS. It was called Palm OS at first, but then it's WebOS. So he went to Google to work on the user experience for Android. Apple and Google being the copycat competitors that they are, well, somehow Google was accused of copying Apple with some of the things, but this was not quite the case, but maybe since, so who knows. But it was interesting to be a part of a fairly transitional period, but not working at Google nor at Apple. And for all the weirdness that that Palm had working against it, there was some pretty seminal stuff going on there. Some really, really game-changing stuff that they just didn't know what to do with, to be honest. So what as a side note, is a secondary lesson from this, aside from like working on a real product with real people that were really focused on making a big giant splash and then not quite making it. So the side note, we got to see how very long weeks and months. My first month at Palm, I worked there every day, 30 days in a row, and they were 10+ hour days, usually plus. And that set the tone for my entire time with the company. Everybody was putting in every ounce because it was a cool product, and it was like, yeah, this could be pretty cool, pretty fun, kind of a game changer. But we tried all this magic. It could not outdo a bad business deal with Sprint and a bad overall pitch to the world. We had to launch with Sprint because AT&T was wrapped up with Apple, and I can't remember what the deal was with T-Mobile, but Sprint was it, and Sprint was not, and Verizon said no. They were interested later, but Sprint was going to be our exclusive launch partner, and Sprint's market share and quality and interest and brand perception were already kind of falling. So yeah, kind of flopped. The Pre was a very capable phone, to say the least. The form factor was grand. It was huge. But it was small. But it was a big deal. The way it worked and the hand and pocket feel and all that. Had wireless charging, but the story was not good enough for all that went into it. None of it struck gold. None of it stuck to the wall, if you like. That was quite the lesson. Maybe the first on that scale for me, that you could do everything generally right and it still just didn't matter. So like I mentioned, there would be, this was in my second wave. So I would start working with food trucks while I was working at Jawbone. When I was working at Palm, I got really into food trucks. So we did that owners association eventually. We started Radio Sunnyvale. So that was, Sunnyvale being the largest small city on the peninsula, had no local media. So we were basically saying, well, we should have local media. Let's do it. What else? We started Valid Rate for better, usually restaurant reviews, but any sort of review using micro reviews that are like Twitter size reviews. So we had a bunch of interesting stuff there, but unfortunately 2008 rolled around and all sorts of seed money dried up because the economy was tanking. I would move to Vegas. I had I didn't even talk about Salon. Here's a bonus. So when I was working at Salon, that's the reason I moved back to Silicon Valley. Salon had been 10 years old at that point. And they they wanted to introduce a feature that they called letters to the editor, but it would be basically comments on stories. So rather than submitting a letter to the editor, you're not really mailing it anymore as you used to back in the day, many years ago. But you could email the editor, in air quotes, I guess, the editor, and then the editor would pick some of those and they would print them on the website. So they were published. So you'd have a letters to the editor section, but they said, why don't we explore enabling people to comment on stories? So you could write a letter to the editor, but on any story, anytime. And so this was back when discussions were not really a thing, or the comments, right? YouTube comments, all this stuff was not a thing yet. So there was a really interesting, this is a little learning experience. The writers, the professional writers and journalists that were contributing to the Salon platform, the publication, said, wait a minute, you're going to let normal people write their words next to mine? And that sounds like, back off, man. Don't be so full of yourself. But they were absolutely correct. I've told a couple of them over the years. I'm like, hey, remember when you said that? That was totally 100% correct. When you have a professional trained journalist or someone who's literally done the work, so to speak, they've done the interviews, they've done the fact checking, they've done some analysis, they've consulted with experts, they've constructed a story, and to have some unknown person with who knows what going on saying like, this is dumb, this is a lie, all this is wrong, and then have people get distracted by that. We were right at the leading edge of that. So that was a weird lesson to learn. What else did we did a couple other things that we were trying to integrate audio commentary and better subscription management. But the key there was that we introduced the letters to the editor, or basically comments, story comments, and all of that learning experience about, here's a fun fact, and I'll leave it there. You could write your letter to the editor, that is the comment that you wanted to post. You could post anonymously, but subscribers, that is paying subscribers to the Salon platform, its publication and other whatever was going on, would get a little star next to their name. So when we first did the anonymous posting, we didn't disable the star. So you would know that an anonymous person was actually a paying subscriber. There was a whole bunch of other little gotchas like that. And the learning lesson about how people behave when you let them publish on your platform, very interesting. So that was probably a more practical first, if you are managing a website or if you have to moderate content and whatnot. Just that first, here's how the world works. Nobody wants to be a good actor on the anonymous internet. Anyway, so that was another first. But there was tons of stuff, the little things, and it's been interesting. And I'm hoping soon we'll have some Vegas-based stuff. Vegas is a weird place. It's going to be the next Silicon Valley, if what I've heard is correct, and it's not. But global hub of innovation, all this stuff. So for being such a smart city on the cutting edge of technology, there's really not a lot of that actually implemented. So there's tons of opportunity, or what I like to say, chaos is opportunity, and there's tons of opportunity in the greater Vegas area. So that's where I'm going to leave it for today. It's been 55 minutes according to the wall clock. Truncate some silence, probably get it down to 50, maybe 52 minutes total. Thanks for listening. I'll make my websites nice eventually, I promise. Take care now. Thanks for listening, and check out the other episodes, and tell a friend, and click subscribe and ring the bell and all the other stuff you always hear people say. I guess if you're on YouTube, you can do all those things. We do publish on YouTube now, youtube.com/@quaglingsand, QUOGGLINGSAND. You can find those links from the profile page linking everything, and from the Quagling Sand website. Okay, I've said enough. Goodbye.